Hey folks, so a quick video on how to deploy PrivateGPT app on Render. So we talked about deploying on Railway as well as then deploying on your personal computer or server. We did talk about the inference speed. It is quite slow for sure, so maybe people who might have tested, it is a bit slow. So first thing, I just wanted to remind about how the private GPT is different than usual method that we use. So our retrieval method usually is where we take a PDF document or any sort of document, extract the text from it, split the text, and then use those chunks to generate embeddings and save it in a vector database. So this step is same in PrivateGPT as well. It's just that we're not going to use the OpenAI embedding model to generate embeddings from these chunks. So we'll use something locally, and Hugging Face embeddings are something that is used in PrivateGPT as of this recording. And what happens with that is we can download the embeddings and run it locally. So same thing with retrieval as well. In the usual Chat Your Data app, you'll see that question is also embedded using some embedding method, either OpenAI or Cohere or so. And then the embeddings are saved in vector database, which are then searched and a generation API. So we used OpenAI previously for taking these relevant answers and generating a nice response from that. So with PrivateGPT, the difference is we'll use Hugging Face embeddings for embedding generation of the document text as well as for the question. And the second thing is we will use an open source model for that. So in this case, we'll use GPT-4All, and in that we'll send the relevant answers and ask the model to generate a response and give that response to us. So the benefit is both of these, the embeddings as well as the generation model, are available locally, and none of the data leaves the local server, be it local server, local machine, or if we're doing something like a render in this case, it stays within that particular instance. So with that, let's look at how the deployment can be done on Render. So first thing is you probably might want to fork the repo, and once you do that, it will be available in your account. So this is the PrivateGPT app specifically. And once you have it in your account, you're going to go to render.com and create a new web service. After that, you'll see a page similar to this. You'll select the PrivateGPT app, and we can give it any name. I'll call it PrivateGPT. Region is fine. So for the build command, we can leave this as is. For the start command is where we're going to go back to the repo, and I left some instructions as how you can install. So you're going to need this whole thing. So we'll take that over. It does have at the beginning, but I'm just going to add, actually I did not copy properly, so it's 1500, and we're just going to add another command. So people ask how they can deploy backend versus the front end. So if you just want to deploy the backend, and I also mentioned this in the repo, you can just use this command and you'll have those two APIs that I talked about, which are basically going to help you to either embed a document, or it will help you to get queries, so the retrieve option. So this is kind of the similar pattern we have been following in most of our videos. So you'll see these two API calls, and then if you're using Bubble, you can call those APIs as discussed previously in some of the videos, especially the video on Cohere multilingual document retrieval. That's the one you'll see we have very similar routes for API call. Now, if you just want to deploy a backend, so this is good. This particular app does use a lot of RAM, so we won't be able to run it on starter. So I tested on multiple different tiers, and I realized that Pro Plus or Pro Max, these are the ones that work. So if you're testing, you could give it a try for a few minutes. It might charge you maybe a few dollars, but if you leave it on, it's going to charge you quite some money. So just make sure that if you're testing, then you test it and then you delete the server or suspend the server right away if you don't want to incur the cost. And then in the long run, definitely it is highly recommended to install on your local machine or local server where you won't incur cost. And at these stages, the app itself is working quite slow, so it's more experimental. Most likely in future we'll have some models which will run faster, so in that case we can definitely have a production deployment, and then if you have users who are using it, then most likely they'll pay for it, so then that's not going to be an issue. So just a word of caution. Now, once you, let's say, select Pro Plus or so, then you're gonna bring in the environment variables. You're gonna go back to the repo, and there is an example.env file. You can basically copy all of these and then bring it over to render. You could either add individually, or there's an option you can create an env file. So I'm going to do this option just to kind of showcase these capabilities. So it's going to do basically the same thing. The format it wants you in this file is you have the variable and then equal sign without space, and then anything after that without any quotes, so directly the value for that. So we're just going to leave it like this. Now, the usual way we used to do was we would go here and then, Python version. So this is something we have to do regardless. I tested it on 3.11.1, so this works. And once that happens, you can hit create web service, and that should initiate the deployment. And now you can, once it builds, you can go to your Bubble app and call the backend APIs. So usually we notice that it's going to be the name of the app .onrender.com/the routes, right? So we have embed and retrieve. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of just deploying the backend, I want to show how we can test it out with the front end as well. So I'll go back to the repo and I'll look at instructions for the front end, which is this. So this is a Streamlit app, a very basic app, Python based, which allows you to test different things. So I'm just going to add the ampersand here and then the rest of the command, which we just got from the repo. So this takes care of deploying the backend, which is the beginning portion, and then the front end, and then it connects both together. So one thing I noticed is that the internal connection between the backend and front end sometimes does not bind to a particular port. So what happens is you have a backend, it opens a communication channel, and then the front end wants to know what communication channel it is available on. And if there's a mismatch, then both are not going to be able to talk. So I'm just going to add something additional, which is just to make sure that the port is explicitly mentioned, and then we can run Streamlit and listen to that particular port. So it might be sounding a bit technical, but you can add this right before timeout, and with that we can deploy. And now our backend, front end, both of the commands are available, and we provided our environment variable Python version, so everything looks good. I think, yeah, we can just go ahead and deploy. So now if you don't want it to auto deploy, of course you can say no, and then we can go ahead and create a web service. This web service creation is going to take some time, because not just building off the repo happens, but also it downloads all of these open source models, and they tend to be quite large files. So you'll see this building process is a lot longer than some of the previous ones we have seen. So I'm going to come back once this is complete. Alright, so the process of building and deploying is completed now. I had quite some trouble deploying. Not sure if it was the memory requirements or something else on render, so I even went up to Pro Max, and now it's working fine. And as shown in previous video, this is the Streamlit app. and it pretty much works same way. I added the Constitution of the US, and once we hit embed, it's gonna call the backend. We'll see some activity happening in the logs for render, and that's usually in the log section. And what should happen is it should take the PDF file and then use the Hugging Face embeddings. That's what's used in PrivateGPT, and then it stores that in a Chroma vector database, which is a local vector database. And you'll see in a little bit where it says it's split into 288 chunks, and it shows that the embeddings are working. So we're good to go, and then we can ask question. It should be available in our list, and the querying part, as mentioned, it takes quite some time. So if you're doing on your computer or server, then it's good. If not, running something on render, it's going to cost a few dollars. So I asked a question about Constitution, which is what is mentioned about Article 1. What you'll notice is it will run a few things in the backend, and once that's complete, we can look at the response. Okay, so the model gave us a response. So there are a bunch of documents, those were pulled, and we should see a response in our Streamlit app as well. Not the best response, to be honest, but it gave a few different places where it pulled that info from. So maybe one could verify if the sources are fine or not. It might need some tweaking to make sure the responses are correct. It just said that Article 1 was mentioned in the context. Hope that answers the question of some folks who requested to make a video on how to deploy and render. And yeah, I'll be showcasing some other apps or some other techniques how you can run similar architecture like PrivateGPT, but a little faster. So they'll be in our next videos. Thank you so much.